We're taught to fear conflict, but we don't talk enough about the damage caused by its absence, especially when silence is laced with quiet resentment. Hidden resentment is not loud or obvious. It doesn't throw dishes or scream across rooms. It simmers. It seeps. And worst of all, it pretends everything is okay. It begins subtly. Maybe it's a text that goes unanswered a little too long, a laugh that feels more forced than free, a hug that lands on the body but doesn't reach the heart. We tell ourselves they're just busy, tired, stressed, but deep down, our body knows. Our nervous system picks it up before our mind can make sense of it. It feels like sitting across from someone you love and suddenly realizing there's a pane of glass between you. You can see them, you just can't feel them. Resentment often starts in silence. Something hurtful is said or done, or not said or done, and it goes unspoken, not because it didn't matter, but because voicing it felt too risky. So it gets swallowed. And then, instead of digesting it, that emotion ferments. The person who swallowed the hurt starts to build a case in their head. Every interaction becomes another data point. See, they don't care. They always do this. Why am I the one who always gives more? But here's the thing. Hidden resentment is rarely just about one thing. It's cumulative. It's emotional compound interest. It accrues from years of unmet needs, unsaid truths, and unbalanced effort. And when it's with someone close, someone we once felt safe with, it becomes even more painful because now it's not just disappointment, it's betrayal. What's hard is that the person holding resentment may not even admit it to themselves. They might still show up, still smile at holidays, still text happy birthday, but emotionally, they've already pulled away. They're protecting themselves. They've decided it's safer to resent you silently than to risk being honest. And it creates this eerie space where connection used to live, a space that feels confusing, lonely, and unspoken. And for the one on the other end of it, the one being quietly resented, it can feel like walking through emotional fog. You can't see the edge, but you know you're not on solid ground anymore. You might try harder, be extra kind, over-explain, make peace without knowing what war you're ending. It's exhausting, and it doesn't work because the resentment isn't being held in the room, it's being hidden in the walls. The hardest part of hidden resentment is that it doesn't give you a chance to repair. There's no open conversation, no argument to work through, just avoidance dressed up as peace. And if you've been socialized to be a peacemaker, this is a particularly cruel irony because you're being punished with silence for not doing something you did. To sit in the discomfort of hidden resentment is to grieve a connection that's dying quietly. And the grief is complicated because the other person might still be there physically. They may still hold the title friend, sibling, partner, teammate, but emotionally, they're gone. And unless they're willing to bring their truth into the light, no amount of effort on your part can close that gap. So what do? We get honest with ourselves first. We name what we feel. We ask questions that feel risky. We stop mistaking politeness for peace, and we accept this painful truth. Not everyone will meet us in that honesty, but those who will, they're worth every vulnerable conversation we've ever had to stumble through. There's a kind of confusion that doesn't come from what people say, it comes from how they say it. It's the moment when someone agrees with their mouth, but everything else in their body is screaming no. You hear, sure, I'd love to hang out, but their tone is flat, their eyes dart away, and their presence feels like a shadow of what it used to be. It's not the words that leave you unsettled, it's the disconnect between their language and their energy. This is one of the most painful places to be in a relationship. When someone is still saying the right things, still showing up on paper, but emotionally, they've already checked out. And maybe they don't even realize it. Maybe they think they're doing the kind thing by saying yes. Maybe they don't want to cause conflict. Or maybe they're carrying resentment so quietly that even they haven't put language to it yet, but you feel it. And it hurts in a way that's hard to explain. We're wired for connection, and part of that connection is built on coherence, when what someone says matches how they make us feel. So when someone's words and energy don't align, it shakes our sense of trust. It makes us question our own intuition. Did I imagine that? Am I being too sensitive? And once we start doubting ourselves, we lose the ability to navigate the relationship with clarity. Sometimes this mismatch happens gradually. It starts with delayed replies, then shorter conversations, then less eye contact. But other times it's sudden, like a switch flipped, and the person who used to light up around you now only offers dim flickers of interest. They're still physically present, but emotionally they're leaning way back, arms folded, guarded, distant, unavailable. And yet they're still saying yes. But a yes without presence isn't kindness, it's avoidance. And often it's a signal of something deeper, maybe unspoken resentment, maybe emotional fatigue, maybe a need to step away that they don't have the courage to name. And that's where it gets messy, because we often take people at their word, especially people we care about. We trust their yes, but when the energy doesn't back it up, we're left feeling like we're chasing something that no longer wants to be caught. It's important to remember that this dissonance is not always malicious. Some people have been taught their whole lives to prioritize harmony over honesty, to keep the peace at all costs, to say yes when they mean no because they don't want to disappoint, disrupt, or be seen as difficult. But that kind of internal split doesn't stay hidden forever. It leaks. It shows up in body language, in tone, in microexpressions. Our nervous systems are smarter than we give them credit for. They can feel when something's off. If you've ever been on the receiving end of this, where someone is saying all the right things, but none of it feels right, you know how disorienting it is. It's like trying to hug someone through a window. You're reaching, you're showing up, but there's something in the way. And if you've ever been the one giving a yes when your heart was quietly whispering no, you know how exhausting it is to perform presence when your soul has already started to leave the room. Real connection asks us for alignment. It asks us to be honest, not just with our words, but with our energy. And that kind of truth-telling takes courage. It's not always clean or easy, but it is the only way we stop hurting the people we love with kindness that isn't real. Because in the end, people may forget the words we said, but they'll never forget how our energy made them feel. Not all disconnection is dramatic. Not all pain is loud. Sometimes the deepest cuts come from the tiniest things: the quick dismissive comment, the subtle sigh when we speak, the joke at our expense that's played off as just teasing. These are micro-dismissals. They're small enough to brush off individually, but collectively they chip away at our sense of worth in a relationship. And over time, they become harder to ignore. It's in the way your story gets cut off mid-sentence because they remembered something more important. It's how they scroll their phone while you're speaking, nodding just enough to pretend they're listening. It's how your ideas, your insights, your feelings are constantly minimized, laughed at, or rerouted back to them. These moments are rarely big enough to confront, but they're constant enough to leave you feeling invisible. What makes disorienting is their subtlety. You can't always name them in the moment. And even if you do, the person will likely say, "You're overreacting," or "I didn't mean it like that." And so we start to doubt ourselves. We start to wonder if maybe we are too sensitive, if maybe this is just how it is. We silence ourselves, not because we want to, but because it feels safer than being made to feel foolish for speaking up. And then comes the distance. Emotional distance rarely shows up all at once. It creeps in. At first, it looks like fewer questions about your life, less curiosity. Then it turns into shorter responses, less laughter, more surface-level interactions. You're still technically close, but the warmth has gone missing. There's a chill in the space between you, and you don't know when it started, but you feel it in your gut. What's especially painful is when emotional distance happens in relationships that used to feel like home. When the person who once saw you deeply now only sees you in pieces. When the one who used to celebrate your small wins now barely reacts. The grief here is quiet but real. It's mourning something that's still technically alive but no longer vibrant. It's waking up to the realization that emotional safety has left the room. Sometimes micro-dismissals are unconscious, learned patterns from people who were never taught how to hold space for others. But other times, they're intentional. They're ways of keeping you small, of maintaining control, of subtly communicating, you don't matter as much as you think you do. Either way, the result is the same: disconnection wrapped in the illusion of normalcy. What makes this so hard to confront is that it rarely feels bad enough to justify naming it. It's not a betrayal, not abuse, not something you can point to in a screenshot, but it is death by 1,000 cuts. And in a culture that often tells us to let the small stuff go, we end up holding an entire storm inside our chest, never letting it out because we're afraid of being seen as dramatic or needy. But the truth is, your need to be seen, heard, and respected is not dramatic. It's human. And naming micro-dismissals doesn't make you weak, it makes you conscious. Emotional distance doesn't always mean the relationship is doomed, but it does mean something needs to be healed, named, or maybe even released. Because staying silent to keep the peace only ensures one thing: you'll be at war with yourself instead. Politeness is often mistaken for kindness, and in most cases it is. It's the please and thank you, the soft tones, the gentle corrections. It smooths over social friction, creates safety in uncomfortable spaces, and makes everyday interactions more bearable. But there's a version of politeness that isn't about kindness at all. It's about avoidance, about self-protection, about hiding in plain sight. It's what happens when someone can no longer be real with you, but still wants to look good while stepping away. This version of politeness becomes armor. It's carefully constructed, always measured, always appropriate, and almost always empty. These are the people who still show up to the dinner, still like your posts, still say we should catch up sometime, but you know in your gut that catch up is never coming. There's a performance happening. You're not being met with truth. You're being managed. The armor of politeness protects people from the vulnerability of confrontation, from the discomfort of saying something shifted in me and I don't feel connected anymore, or I was hurt by something you said, or even just I've outgrown this version of our relationship. These are hard, vulnerable truths. They take courage. So instead, many people reach for the safety of vague kindness. They default to etiquette because it allows them to disengage without ever having to be the bad guy. But the one on the receiving end, they feel the absence. And what's worse, they're often left confused because technically nothing bad has happened. There was no falling out, no argument, no big betrayal. Just a gradual coolness, a thinning of warmth, an increase in generic pleasantries and a decrease in genuine presence. You try to name it and hear, what do you mean everything's fine? But you know it isn't. You can't fake felt. This kind of politeness is painful because it keeps people trapped in ambiguity. You can't grieve a relationship that hasn't officially ended. You can't repair something if no one will admit it's broken. You're left holding a question mark with no one willing to give it punctuation. That ambiguity becomes its own kind of emotional torture. Soft, subtle, but ever present. It's important to say this. Most people don't use polite armor with cruel intent. They are not trying to manipulate or gaslight. They're trying to avoid pain. And ironically, that instinct to not hurt someone is what often causes the most pain. Because instead of being honest, they slowly starve the relationship of realness. They think they're being gentle, but what they're actually being is absent. And if you're someone who values depth, presence, and truth, being on the receiving end of this can make you question yourself. You might think, am I too intense, too sensitive? You're not, you're just aware. You notice what others pretend not to see. You feel what they won't acknowledge. That doesn't make you too much, it makes you in tune. The hard truth is, we don't get to choose how other people show up, or don't. What we do get to choose is how long we stay in rooms where we're only being tolerated, not truly seen. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for ourselves is to name the politeness for what it is, distance in disguise, and to gently walk away, not in anger, but in self-respect. Real connection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability asks something that politeness cannot give: risk. The risk of being honest, of being misunderstood, of being real. So if someone won't meet you in that space, it's not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of where they are in their own emotional courage. And sometimes they're just not ready to take off the armor. But here's the beautiful part. Once you stop chasing people who wear the mask of niceness, you start attracting people who bring their whole, flawed, present selves to the table. The ones who will sit in discomfort with you, who will have the messy conversations, who won't ghost you with a smile. That's where real connection lives. And that's what you're worthy of. Every single time. Denial often feels easier, at least at first. It protects us from the truth we're not ready to face. It allows us to maintain the illusion that everything is fine, even when our body tells us otherwise. When someone close to us begins to pull away, when their tone hardens or their warmth fades, our first instinct isn't always to ask the hard question. More often it's to rationalize, to excuse, to say, maybe they're just busy. Maybe it's just a phase. Denial offers comfort, but it comes at a cost. And that cost is our inner peace. Because even as we try to pretend nothing has changed, the truth festers under the surface. We start overanalyzing text messages, replaying conversations, questioning our worth. We begin to bend, to accommodate, to perform anything to maintain the connection we fear we're losing. But in doing so, we lose something far more sacred: our authenticity. Denial disconnects us not just from the other person, but from ourselves. There's a special kind of heartbreak in pretending you don't feel the disconnection, in laughing at jokes that sting, in showing up to spaces where you're no longer met with care. When we deny the reality of a strained or broken relationship, we start carrying its weight alone. We give the benefit of the doubt until it becomes a burden. We silence our intuition until we can barely hear it anymore. And we shrink slowly, quietly, until we're a version of ourselves that's easier to love, less likely to cause discomfort, more likely to be accepted. But the truth always finds a way to rise, whether it shows up as resentment, anxiety, burnout, or that deep ache in the gut when we think of them. Truth doesn't stay buried forever, and the longer we avoid it, the more damage it does. Because denial delays grief. It delays the necessary discomfort of clarity. And without clarity, we can't choose what's healthy. We can't heal. That's where boundaries come in, not as punishment, not as revenge, but as sacred lines drawn in self-respect. Boundaries are not walls, they are doors with locks. They don't shut people out forever, but they do ask people to knock before entering. They are how we say, I love you, but I will not abandon myself to keep you comfortable. They're the way we choose our own peace over the illusion of closeness. Setting boundaries is hard, especially when we've been conditioned to keep the peace at all costs. We worry about being selfish, dramatic, or unkind. But the most powerful boundaries don't come from anger. They come from clarity. They say, I've seen the pattern, and I'm no longer willing to pretend it doesn't exist. They are an invitation for others to meet us in truth, or if they can't, to let us walk away without guilt. And when we finally stop denying what we've known all along, something incredible happens. We reclaim our energy. We stop rehearsing imaginary conversations in the shower. We stop trying to decode tone or chase closeness. We begin to breathe again. And from that breath, we begin to build relationships that are mutual, present, and rooted in honesty, not performance. Because here's the truth, real connection can withstand honesty. And any relationship that falls apart because you spoke your truth wasn't a relationship that honored you in the first place. The cost of denial is high, but the return on boundaries is everything. Clarity, peace, healing, and most importantly, a deeper, stronger connection to yourself.